Picture this, Torino, 1883. A young woman gets admitted to the Lawyers Association. Then, just months later, a court goes and takes it away. Not because she failed an exam or because there was any misconduct on her part, but just because she was a woman. And the court actually argued on the record that women's temperament and even their clothing made them unfit for the courtroom. That's not a plot from a fiction novel or a movie. That actually happened in Italy. And it is the true story sitting underneath one of Netflix Italian series, La Legge di Lidia Poët, The Law According to Lidia Poët. Hi, I'm Paola, and this is a space where I talk about movies, books, series, or honestly, anything that feels worth sharing, especially from Brazil and from Italy. One where I'm from, and the other one where I am. Today we're going to talk about who was the real Lidia Poët, why does his story still matter, why did two screenwriters build a crime drama around her, and how did they cast the people, how did they dress it and shoot it, and does the show actually hold up a piece of entertainment, or does it tell the true story of Lidia? Let's get to it. So, the real Lidia Poët was born in 1855 in Val Germanasca near Torino. She was part of a well-loved Protestant family. As a young woman, she trained to become a teacher, since that was basically the only profession women openly were able to do at the time. But that wasn't her dream, her actual dream. After her father died, she enrolled in law school in Torino. Lidia was the only woman in the program at the time, and she graduated in June of 1881 with a thesis on women's social conditions and right to vote. Imagine that back in those days. Mind you, and I'll bring you just a little bit of fact here, the Italian women were only allowed to vote after 1945, 64 years later of Lidia's graduation. So 64 years after Lidia Poët graduated. She did her legal internship, she passed the bar exam with flying colors, she was one of a star, and on August 9th, 1883, she became the first woman admitted to practice law in Italy, officially. Go Lidia. But the celebration didn't last long, and here comes the bummer. The Crown's prosecutor at the time challenged the legitimacy of her admission and took it to Torino's Court of Appeal, ordering her out from the registry. She fought back all the way to Italy's highest court. She didn't take a breath. However, in 1884, the court kept the decision. Their reasoning of the no given to Lidia was, in plain terms, the legal profession counted as a public office, and public offices were closed to all women, unless a law explicitly said otherwise. And hers didn't. So you may ask, what did Lidia Poët do? She spent the next several decades doing real legal work anyway. She drafted cases, built arguments, fought for the rights of minors, fought for the rights of marginalized, and fought for the rights of, yes, women. But she did it through her brother, Enrico Poët, law license. Since hers had been stripped away, what was she gonna do, right? So she was a strong supporter of women's suffrages and fought for women's emancipation, defending their right to study and work. She directed the legal section of the National Council of Italian Women and participated in discussions and initial drafting of innovative legal principles that became part of the Italian law only decades later. And what I'm talking about here, just a few examples, she worked on divorce, the right to vote, the equal treatment for illegitimate children. I mean, the woman was really ahead of her time. She participated as a delegate at international conferences on prison legislations where prisoners' rights were discussed. To this end, she traveled to Russia and France, where she was awarded a special honor for her contributions. All this becoming a lawyer and then not becoming one. But let's go back to her law license, what happened? She had to wait until 1919 1918 when a new law finally let women hold public offices. But then it was only in 1920, at 65, she was 65 years old, that she was then officially readmitted to the Italian Lawyers Association, becoming the first woman in Italy to be registered as a lawyer. This was 39 years after she had first earned her degree. She was never married. She died in 1949 at 94. That's the real significance here. This isn't just the first Italian female lawyer, neat trivia fact. It is a woman who had the credential, who passed every single test the system threw at her, and who still had to wait basically a lifetime for the title to mean what it was supposed to mean. That gap between competence and permission is the whole story that we see of Lidia. So how did two screenwriters land on 19th century Piemontese lawyer nobody outside of Torino had really heard of back or before this? So according to the creators and the writers, Davide Orsini and Guido Iaculano basically were working on something else entirely different set in Torino. And while doing that research about that other world, they basically stumbled onto Lidia's story, and that made them change completely the course of what they were doing. They then met producer Matteo Rovere and decided to do a show with Lidia at the center instead. What hooked them was less the biography of Lidia Poët and more the spirit of Lidia Poët. They liked that she was epic and combative figure, but that she was also funny and tender at the same time. And they said it was almost absurd that someone this important as her wasn't already a household name anywhere, so they took it and made it theirs. The fact that Lidia Poët's story was not so well known gave the authors the opportunity to use different genres to develop an original formula. So they made it a hybrid mix. They ended up doing a series between historical, thriller, light law procedures, and unconventional romance with the strong ironic and unconventional approach to feelings. And I'll get more to that later on. The creators did not want to make a documentary series. The goal was to capture the spirit of the real Lidia. In an interview to Vanity Fair, the creators of the show mentioned that Lidia was a hyper-modern woman born in the wrong century. And they summarized well in this quote. What we recognized in her story was that nobody recognized her work, but she continued to do it, driven by a radically unconformist spirit, a virtue that remains relevant and increasingly rare. For every Lidia, there are countless Enricos. But the presence of a Lidia can change them, can change the Enricos. So they leaned hard into the texture of the period itself. Torino in the 1880s had Cesare Lombroso. He was the one behind Teoria Lombroso, which defends that criminality is a hereditary pathologically and that deviant behaviors is determined by biological and physical characteristics. Basically, it's born with you. Cesare Lombroso was responsible for the early roots of forensic science and fingerprinting. Now, there were a lot going on in Torino at the time besides Cesare Lombroso. The city of Torino of 1880s had anarchistic circles, spiritualists, the largest free Jewish community in Italy. It was a boiling city. It is important to know, though, that Netflix's series got strong critics from the descendants of the real Lidia Poët. The great-grandniece and the great-great-grandniece have expressed strong disappointment with the production. They basically say that the show depicted Lidia as a woman who constantly resorts to provocative and reckless behavior far from her true nature. That the series gave too much space for her fictionalized love life, ultimately diminishing her true feministic activism and her real fight for women's rights. More than that, they say that the show trims the historical context. Although they are relevant points from the family, I personally believe the series does more good than bad, bringing Lidia Poët's story to light. More than that, it brings Lidia's spirit, and that's what matters. So let's talk about the casting. Leading the show is Matilde De Angeli, an actress who had already been building a name in films like Veloce come il vento, which in English is called Italian Race. When asked about taking the role of Lidia Poët, she said that she always asks herself why she wants to be the voice for a particular character. And that is important to choose people you genuinely attach and want to keep investigating. In the series, there is also Edoardo Scarpetta, who plays Jacopo Barberis. He's a journalist who becomes her partner in investigation and her will they, won't they love interest. There's Pierluigi Pasino, who plays her dear brother Enrico, the more conventional lawyer who initially resists her ideas but always ends up seeing great value in her work side by side with him. I call him the true feminist of the series. Then there is Sara Lazzaro, who plays Enrico's wife, Teresa, and Gianmarco Saurino. He is the king's prosecutor, Pierluigi Fornò, Lydia's friend and one of her love interests. Now let's talk about cinematography and production. This series is shot entirely in Piemonte. The courtroom scenes were filmed inside of Torino's ex Curia Maxima, a location which is normally closed to the public, and it was opened exclusively for this production. It's where they do the court scenes, essentially. Palazzo Faletti Barolo stood in for other courtroom interiors, and Palazzo dei Cavalieri became the newspaper office of Gazzetta Piemontese. There were also shots taken at the Museo del Carcere Le Nuove, where some of the psychiatric ward scenes were filmed. The exterior of the poet Barberi's family villa was shot in Torino's iconic Piazza Cavour, while the interiors were actually built and filmed at the Villa San Lorenzo in Racconigi. One detail I really love and I really wanted to share with you guys is the lighting was not arbitrary. Torino was actually the first Italian city to receive public electric lighting, and the production team talked it through with the cinematographer in detail. So you basically see through the series first the candles, then it transitioned to oil lamps, and then you see the electric bulbs. It's like tracking the area's real shift in technology scene by scene. That's the kind of texture level historical accuracy that never shows up in a plot summary that I really love. The overall visual and music approach is kind of pop, with aerial shots and obsessive attention to costumes and set design. Some critics have even called it and compared it to the sensibility of Bridgerton. I would say that this one is a little bit more historically accurate. Anyway, costume designer Stefano Ciamiti, who was also the costume designer for the Oscar nominee Il Capitano, said that he uses the costumes to evoke the repressive laws towards women with the help of restrictive jackets and coats and vests. Much like the working women of the 1970s, we see the adoption of the suit and the blouse emulating the male uniform. In the series, women can be seen in bow ties with a feminine twist to it. Now let's go a bit deeper because the costumes really deserve their own chapter here in this video. They're not just pretty, they're doing a narrative work. So as I said, costume designer Stefano Ciamiti built garments that faithfully reproduce late 1800s fashion. They are accurate enough that Torino's National Cinema Museum displayed 10 of the actual costumes worn by Matilde De Angelis inside of the Mole Antonelliana, which, by the way, did not exist at the time of this series. Fun fact for you. And then there are small curious details to notice. Insects, bees, flies, and other creatures pop up constantly in Lydia's wardrobes. And they function as a visual sign of quiet rebellion, symbol of modernity and unconformity that match a character who refuses imposed codes, who build her own identity through the rules. It is the costume designer kind of pushing away Lidia Poët from the time that she lived in, and as she was, well, ahead of her time, he wanted to put her ahead of her time. Now let's step back from the history lesson and the cinema nerdiness for a second. Now let's just talk about this as a piece of streaming series, right? Because structurally, I believe it's doing something clever. In each episode, the story is bringing a mystery case of her own. She works on it, she gets it solved on this specific episode. It's open and closed, making each new case feel fresh instead of a copy-paste of the last one. Structurally, it reminded reminded me of something from back in the days where you had something horizontal but something vertical, something like CSI for the old folks out there. There's also a sharp detail that it is the title of the series itself, and I think it is worth pointing it out. I basically found online through my researches that it would have been easier and more accurate to call the show The Investigations of Lidia Poët, but they call it The Law instead, because that's the actual point. This is a show about a woman staking a claim on the law itself, not just about solving crimes. These are small choices that tells us, the spectators, details that the creator want to bring to life. Now, genre-wise, as I said, it's kind of a blend. Alongside the mystery-driven vertical plot, there is another horizontal arc throughout the series that leans into a romance novel territory. Lydia's unconventional, ahead of its time love life. That's arguably where the main actress De Angelis does her best work. She carves out a character who's trying to constantly to outrun a society that wants to put her in this little box. She needs to get married. And I will spoil a little bit here for you guys, and I'm sorry, but Lydia does not want to marry any of her love interests, which is something I personally love. Across all 3 seasons, there is a clear thread. Feminism in this show mostly proves itself through actions rather than big speeches or monologues, which is ironically because it's exactly the kind of freedom that Lidia Poët never had. The public reception data backs it up with overall great feeling towards the series. In Rotten Tomato, it has an 89% approval rating. It also won the Nastro d'Argento for Best Crime Series, and it earned the Critics' Choice Award nomination for Best Foreign Series. So, what did I actually walk away with after 3 seasons of Lidia Poët? It is a show that isn't trying to do a textbook work. It's fun. And to be honest, it introduced me to a very important character of Italian history that I didn't know personally about it before. The real Lidia Poët didn't get her license back through one courtroom triumph as in the series. She got it back after 39 years of just non-stopping. The Netflix version compresses all of that into murder series and a love triangle. Well, maybe more like a trapezoid, to be honest. It takes real liberties that her family pushed back on, but also got an entire global audience saying her name for the first time. I think that's pretty much worth it, right? And honestly, this show gets more interesting once you know exactly where the real history ends and the costume drama begins. So, let me know. Did you know the story of Lidia Poët, the real of it or the fiction? Have you watched the series? What do you think about it? And if you have not watched, go watch and then come back and let me know. But for now, see you next time. Ciao, ciao.